Um, hey there YouTube. I wanted to make this video because I recently had an interesting idea I thought of about a proposed alternative to minimum wage. I would like to hear some feedback on what you guys think of this alternative, whether it's better or worse than our current system, and whether it'd be politically viable. So, I'd like some comments and feedback on that. Some of the idea for this proposal came from the basic income idea that a lot of people on the internet are talking about it these days. Basic income is basically you give a certain amount of money to everyone. And a lot of the reasons why people want basic income is because they say we're facing issues like technological unemployment, and just it's hard to be competitive in such an innovative marketplace and things like that. But anyway, so I think that basic income or guaranteed income is a very interesting idea, and we need to talk about it. But I don't think it's immediately practical, nor is it obviously achievable. Okay, because just paying people money, that's expensive, and like it could lead, like, we don't know what it would do. Like, what would people do? I mean, we can, if you're a sociologist, I'm sure you can make certain general claims about what might happen or what might not happen, but no one can know for sure what would happen if all of a sudden the government said, oh, we're going to pay for everybody's basic income. Okay? So, basic income, I think it's an interesting idea. I don't think it's immediately practical. And I think that should be obvious, but that kind of thinking needs to be part of our discussion about social policy and other things. Even though it's very radical, we need to at least use it as a thought experiment. So I was thinking about basic income, and I'm a critic of minimum wage, and I have been because I think it limits individual options. Okay. And basic income doesn't have that same vulnerability. With basic income, you still have plenty of options. The problem is, I think that you don't feel individually accountable for what you do. Like, when the government pays for your paycheck, like, it would sort of make you feel useless or meaningless. And I also think it would make markets unresponsive to what work actually needs to be done. But anyway, minimum wage has this problem where we apply it universally to everyone, or to all employers, no matter their situation, whether you're Walmart, McDonald's, Goodwill. And it's not completely unreasonable. Like, these businesses should be able to afford to pay individuals enough to survive, you know? But it still limits your choices. And the other thing is, it treats everyone the same. Like, not everyone needs the same amount of money to survive. Some people can get by on less. I personally think that I could get by on much less than minimum wage. But it's honestly, it's a challenging problem. How do you hold companies accountable for how they treat workers without creating these rules that limit individuals? That's a challenging problem. And I think minimum wage is a fairly good solution, compared to what other alternatives you could come up with. And some positives of minimum wage is that it doesn't require the government to spend any money. It applies to everyone the same. But at the same time, one of the biggest negatives of minimum wage is it's hard to tell when it creates problems, okay? Most people can understand if you raise the minimum wage to $100 an hour, like, most people would understand how that would cause problems. But the current minimum wage is $7.25. Where does that cause problems? Like, what jobs that people could be doing aren't being done? And that's hard to measure. Like, there's no spot in an accounting spreadsheet where it says, oh, these are all the jobs that minimum wage eliminated. Recently I read an article online about how Borderlands Books in San Francisco shut down, and they cited minimum wage as one reason why their business would no longer be viable. Mostly it was because of internet bookstores. They have to compete with that. But they said, well, we support living wage principle, but we don't think our business model is viable anymore at these wage levels, so we're going to have to shut down. Okay, so that's one example of a business that had to close due to minimum wage. And that's because the San Francisco minimum wage was raised to $15 an hour or something like that. So my point is, it's hard to measure and know exactly how many cases businesses are deciding to close, or maybe over time they just become less profitable, and then your local grocery store shuts down, and then Walmart comes in. Okay? It's like, I'm not saying that that's automatically happening. I'm just saying it's hard to know when that's happening. Okay. So that's my sort of pet peeve with minimum wage. It's just hard to measure the effects, and it's very broad and general. At the same time, the simplicity makes the policy avoid a lot of other problems that other policies could have, because it's simple, like everyone understands, and it's easy for businesses to conform. But if they don't conform, you shut them down. Anyway, okay, one more reason why I don't like minimum wage, okay? It assumes price levels remain constant, when in reality, like, computers weren't available 50 years ago, but now you can get a smartphone for $20. Okay? And so, and it's not just that we've created this technology, it's all these sectors have become more efficient. So while it may have cost so much money to live in the past, we may actually be able to live cheaper now or in the future. I'm a big fan of, like, there's shows about stuff like tiny houses and stuff like that, just people learning to live super economically. And I'm a fan of learning to live economically. Now, I don't think we should have to live that way just because corporations decide to control the economy and can manipulate everything we do. So I understand why most people feel we need to hold these companies accountable for what they pay their workers. I understand that. I sympathize with that. And I agree that government can and should do some things to hold companies accountable for these things. But I'm just a little bit skeptical that the solution we have today is the best one. Like, I'm not completely against social programs, but I understand that social programs are hard to implement correctly. Like, when you create a program or a policy that affects everyone in the entire country, there are going to be side effects. Like, it's like creating a giant office building. In order to do that, you need an architecture with experience, understanding in physics, all this stuff. And while the building may be a great idea, if you implement it incorrectly, it will fail, it will crush people, it will do all these things. So it's not that social programs are always a horrible idea, it's that they're difficult to implement correctly, so we need to be careful in implementing new social programs and evaluate existing ones to see if they still service our needs appropriately. Okay? So I tend to be conservative because I'm skeptical of new social programs, not because I think they're automatically a bad idea. There are a couple things that I think social programs need to do if they're going to be effective. They need to fall within the scope of government. We have to ask, is this government's job? Building roads, schools, that's government's job. That's a good thing to do, obviously. So does it fall within the scope of government? Can the government help out needy people? I think it can play an important role in that. What exactly that is, I'm not an expert to say. And I think there's a lot of social programs that might seem like a good idea that end up being terrible, like buildings you draw on a piece of paper, like fantasizing about a beautiful city, but to actually build the building correctly, you have to hire an architect, understand physics, do all this stuff. It takes a lot of work to implement effective social programs. So the social program needs to fall within the scope of government. The other thing is capacity. Even if it's within the scope of government, is government capable of implementing this program effectively? Like, do we have the resources? Are we going to go bankrupt trying to fund this program? And that's an important issue. Like, our country has serious financial issues. We have a lot of financial obligations and debt. And well, I'm not going to be catastrophic about that. I don't think our debt is going to crush us immediately, but it is a financial risk that we need to be aware of. Okay? And when we have social programs like Social Security and other stuff, we have to evaluate whether we are capable of providing that service. So, social programs need to fall within the scope of government. They need to fall within the capacity of government. And the last and final thing is they shouldn't infringe on individuals' liberties. And more importantly, rights. Okay? There's two words I want to talk about, rights and liberties. Okay? Both these words are important. A right is something that you should be fundamentally guaranteed. That if government forbids you from doing that, it's unethical, it's deplorable, and irresponsible. So we consider stuff like freedom of speech a right, freedom of conscience. If the government imprisons you for saying something, that's unconscionable. That's horrible. So speech, conscience, those are rights. A liberty, as opposed to a right, a liberty is just something that you can do. Like, there's a lot of rules in our country and laws, and not all rules are against doing something that's morally wrong. For example, well, a lot of regulation is just to make the laws easier to enforce. So you have to register your car, do all this stuff. Now, that prevents problems, but if you had a car and didn't register it, you might technically be breaking the law, but you really haven't done anything wrong, you know? So, I'm just trying to think of examples that illustrate the difference between rights and liberties, okay? And one of the problems with some political philosophies like libertarianism, and I consider myself very much sympathetic to libertarian views, but one of the problems is sometimes it fails to distinguish between rights and liberties. For example, smoking marijuana is not a right. Like, if you're denied the ability to smoke marijuana, it's not equivalent to denying you the freedom of speech or the freedom of conscience. You may be denied a liberty, but it's not a right. So, I wanted to define and distinguish those terms, liberties and rights. There's a difference. So social programs, I think they should be aware of how they affect individuals' liberties, and we shouldn't take away liberties that we don't have to take away. Or we should at least be careful when we take away liberties. But with rights, we need to vigorously defend our rights. Right to expression, right to conscience. There's lots of rights, and the Bill of Rights in the Constitution is great, but I don't think it's a definitive list of what is a right. I think we have to figure out what rights mean to us. And it's good that we have this document that tries to capture our important rights, but a lot of liberals don't feel like we have a right to bear arms. So that's an instance where people disagree on what is a fundamental right. And I don't want to get into all that. I just want to point out there's a difference between rights and liberties. And when social programs infringe on small liberties, that can be annoying or problematic, but it's not necessarily taking away a human right. So for example, if you tell someone you can't work for $5 an hour, you have to work for at least $7.25 an hour. You can't do any job where you would be earning less than $7.25 an hour. Like, that may be a right or it may be a liberty. You're certainly taking away a liberty, but whether it's a right is another issue. Okay. Sorry, a lot of stuff and it's heavy, but I think it's important to establish some definitions and some words that we can agree on and stuff like that. Anyway, my proposal that instead of, okay, the basic thing I'm looking for is we need to be able, employers need to pay more. Like these big companies like Walmart and stuff, they are underpaying people and they're just in control. There's enormous wealth inequality, and I don't like to measure wealth inequality in absolute numbers. I like to measure it in terms of freedom. The absolute numbers can be misleading because just because some guy has $1 billion doesn't mean he could spend all of it on food and fix a famine if it existed. Because there's limited amount of resources, and the money doesn't automatically create new resources. Money is about economic power, and just because someone has $1 billion doesn't mean he's spending it on food and taking food away from other people. So economic inequality is real and it's important, but I think we should measure it in terms of liberty, not in terms of absolute dollars. The absolute dollars are important, but it's not, it can be a little bit deceptive. Okay. If you measured something like how much fuel billionaires were using, I imagine the middle class, the 99%, are using more fossil fuels than all the billionaires put together. Okay? But that doesn't mean wealth inequality is okay or whatever. It just means that the absolute numbers of wealth inequality don't give the full picture. You have to look at who has power, why they have power, what they can do, what resources they have access to. It's a complex problem, and you can't just spit a number out and think that you understand how wealth in the world works and stuff like that. So, and to fix wealth inequality, it's not just a simple numbers problem either. We can't just say, oh, give these people money, even though that could help. Like, they've shown directly giving people money is one of the best ways to help them. But like I was saying with social programs in general, they're complex and you need to be able to evaluate. So employees need to be paid more, okay, relatively, because wealth inequality is excessive. But in order to be paid more, I think what we need is leverage. We don't need more rules. We don't need rules saying you have to do this, and you have to do this. What we need is leverage. What we need is say, to be able to say, hey, you have to pay me at least this much because I'm worth this much, and if you don't, I can go somewhere else, I can do somewhere else. We need leverage, and leverage is what will liberate people. Leverage is what will fix wealth inequality. Leverage is the tool we can use to gain economic freedom. Okay? But in order to have leverage, you have to have options. In order to say to your employer, hey, you're not paying me enough, I really need a raise. You need to pay me more. You need the ability to go somewhere else or do something else. And maybe even that other option doesn't pay as much, but as long as you could survive, like, that's still leverage, okay? But leverage requires options, okay? I don't think minimum wage gives people more options. I think it dramatically reduces the options they can do, okay? Starting a business is incredibly difficult. When you want to start a new business, your problem is going to be profitability. You need to make more than $0 an hour. That is the challenge of starting a new business, making $0 an hour. A lot of new businesses, they lose money, okay? Now, if you take that standard of profitability, $0 an hour or more than $0 an hour, and you raise it up to $7.25 an hour, that difference it's a big difference. It can be hard to meet that when you're trying to start a new business, okay? One of the challenges with starting a business in the world we live in is people really don't want for anything. They have everything they need. They go to the store and get food they want. They get clothes they want. So when people aren't in need to start a business, instead of supplying needs, you have to supply them something they want, like entertainment, like all these frivolous, maybe they're interesting, maybe they're even valuable, maybe they're even helpful and educational, but they aren't the same as necessities. And when people don't want for anything, it's hard to start a business, because like, what are you gonna give them that they don't have? Okay, how are you gonna make that standard of profitability? Anyway, so the standard for a new business is more than $0 an hour, and ultimately it's enough to live on. But for a while at least, you can live on savings or like be supported by other people potentially until you get off the ground. But if you're at least profitable, then it shows the business model is viable. It shows people are willing to pay for that service or thing. So you may not make a ton of money at first, but you'll at least demonstrate that you have another option, and then you'll have leverage. So then you can ask for more pay. Okay? So, my problems with minimum wage, it takes away options. It's hard to know exactly what it does to the economy. A lot of contemporary research is showing that its effects aren't as bad as some people try to say. Like, marginal minimum wage changes, raising it from like 7 to 8, doesn't make huge shifts in the marketplace. Like, it makes sense because most people aren't working at $7 an hour. But I think the existence of minimum wage itself leads people to not see what the true standards is of raw profitability. Anyway, so what is another social program that we could implement that wouldn't take away options from people, but would still hold employers accountable and help people have enough to survive on? What is another potential social program that we could use to try to solve this problem? Let's try to expand our thinking, okay? Whether you're liberal or conservative, like, what do you like about social programs? What do you see? What do you hate? Like, we need lots of ideas to fix these kind of problems. We just shouldn't be like, oh, minimum wage was potentially a good thing in the past, it fixed all these problems, and that's automatically going to be our solution in the future. No, we have to ask, okay, did minimum wage work? Why or why not? Is it going to be the best solution in the future? Why or why not? What are more alternatives? We need more thinking. We don't need people who just say, oh, corporations are bad, raise minimum wage. Even though that might be a good idea. I'm not in a position to say that's a bad idea. I'm not an expert on anything like that, but I know enough to say that we need more ideas, and that I don't think minimum wage is the perfect solution. It may be a lot better than a lot of other options, but it's not perfect. Okay, so now, finally, for the point I'm trying to make, the alternative I want to suggest. It's really simple. Basically, it's just a wage subsidy to workers. Instead of telling employers they have to pay workers at least a certain amount, we say, okay, anyone who earns less than $15 an hour, we'll use 15 because it seems to be the new minimum wage standard. Anyone earning less than $15 an hour, we're going to help you out. We're going to give you a little bit of extra cash. We aren't going to mess around with your employer. If they're a bad employer, you can go somewhere else. But we're just going to help you out if you aren't making enough money until you figure out how to make the amount of money you need to survive. We're just going to help you out until you figure that out. Okay, so whatever you're doing, whatever your job is, if you're making less than $15 an hour, we will pay you money to help you get closer to that mark. So if you're earning, in fact, whatever you're earning will take you halfway to $15 an hour. If you're earning $0 an hour, well, like you're volunteering somewhere because you can't find a job. And that's all you're able to do with your time right now, just because you don't have skills or whatever to be valuable. So if you're earning zero, we'll take you halfway to $15 an hour. We'll pay you $7.50. Okay? And then, so you start by earning nothing from your employer. You're just a volunteer. But you can choose where you volunteer at. So you aren't doing something that you're forced to do. You're doing something that you believe in, that you want to help out with. You're working on some charity or project that you want to help. Okay? And obviously there would have to be some accountability here, so people aren't just scamming the system. But the premise is we subsidize them until they're able to improve what they're earning. So you start out making $0 an hour, and the government pays you $7.50 an hour. And it's only for when you work. And there's accountability checks and stuff involved. But, okay, then let's say you find this other project, and it's another charity project. It's not super profitable, but it is a little bit. And so they're at least able to pay you $3 an hour, which is like, it's very hard to live on that much. That's extremely low wage. So this charity, they'll say, okay, we see you've been unemployed for a long time. We see you've been volunteering, but we'll pay you $3 an hour. So then what happens is the government says, okay, now you're making $3 an hour. Well, we're only going to take you halfway to 15. So whereas before we were paying you $7.50, now we're only going to pay you $6 an hour. So your total wage will be $9 an hour. Okay? So then you're working, your employer, which is a charity, supposedly, pays you $3 an hour, and the government pays you $6. Okay? And you're motivated to move up to a better employer because your total pay went from $7.50 to $9. And what the government pays you also went down. It went from $7.50 to $6. So it's not like you're motivated to stay in a situation where you're reliant on the government. You're motivated to still move ahead because then you'll be making more money. Okay, so Your employer pays you 3, government pays you 6. And then the next step, you find an employer who pays you $5 an hour. Then your total pay would be $12.50. No, that's wrong. Your total pay would be $10 an hour, because the government takes you halfway to the target wage, which is going to be 15 in this case, and the government pays you less. Then you make $10 an hour, and then your total wage is $12.50, and the government's only paying you $2.50. And then once you finally get to $15 an hour, then the government doesn't help you out anymore. But in the meantime, the government was able to help you. One of the things I like about this kind of program is that you can measure. You can measure who's taking out benefits. You can measure why they're taking out benefits. You can adapt it, like, you can do studies that figure out, okay, why aren't these employers paying people very much? The other thing, it gives people options. People can decide what they do to work. They can decide to work at this place or this other place, but they're still motivated to take more pay, because that will increase their total pay. So that's my proposed alternative to minimum wage. I would appreciate some feedback on this. I realize this video is long and I'm sort of ranting and not everything may make sense, but I'm just trying to learn and figure things out as is everyone else. So I think learning this stuff will be beneficial to me, and so I want to be able to express how I feel, and if I'm wrong, I want to learn why I'm wrong, not just be told I'm wrong and be frustrated. But so any feedback would be good, and there's a lot of controversy on these issues, so I think we need people thinking about it and trying to solve it, even if they're just unemployed college dropouts. But that's all I have to say for today, and thanks for watching, and please give feedback.